Hi, I'm Greg.
And I'm Leanne,
Welcome to Empowered Now.
where we save humanity one relationship at a time. We all struggle from time to time connecting with and understanding others and ourselves.
So we hope to encourage you to live a more authentic and empowered life by sharing what we've learned as coaches and as individuals.
Empowered Now is LGBTQ2IA, alternative lifestyle, poly, and kink friendly.
Thanks for joining us
And enjoy the show. Hi, and welcome to episode 16, Managing Chronic Illness in a Relationship. So, honey.
Yes.
Why is this a topic, something that interests you?
Well, I've had a lot of experience with it, with you and with other partners.
Right.
And it's one of those things that I think gets oftentimes overlooked, even in the short term, even if you're dealing with a partner that's, managing a chronic condition, in the short term. And by short term, I mean, maybe, 6 months or a year or whatever, but it's something that's ongoing and longer than just, being cold or having the flu or whatever. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's something that we can all learn from, really. And ultimately, I think that's why we're here, is to, help people understand and see things from a different perspective, maybe. And this is something that I know that you and I are both intimately familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
How about
sure
you?
Sure are, yeah. Well, what you said, and I will make a note that I have experience on both sides of the coin, so that it's nice to bring that perspective to this conversation as well. And so do you, right? I mean, we have been, in a situation of chronic conditions or illness that carry on for years, others that have a kind of trajectory of recovery over time, sometimes years. Like currently I'm dealing with my post-concussion syndrome recovery still. And I had hoped that I wouldn't be, but this is the reality of things, right? On top of which I've got anxiety exacerbated by my concussion. And so I've never had to deal with that before at the same level. And anxiety about things that I haven't really had a lot of anxiety about prior. So, it's an ongoing process, and I don't know if I will fully recover. And it's, possible that I won't. And so for me, part of the journey of that, as well as I've had, chronic pain, inflammation, injuries where I broke my back. I was, unable to do much for a year. For me, the idea of this conversation is, I guess, awareness around how it impacts us, how it impacts our partners, mm-hmm. and what can we do about that, mm-hmm. from both sides, right?
Right.
Yeah, was that a really long explanation?
It was great. No, I liked it. It's thorough. Not long, yeah. Thorough. It was
thorough.
Very thorough.
I'm nothing if not thorough.
Exactly. The one thing that came up for me while you were explaining it too is that I think it's important to note that when we say chronic illness, we're referring to physical, mental, psychological, and emotional illnesses. Mm-hmm. So anything really that's chronic and ongoing, and we don't want people to assume that we're just talking about like physical ailments here. Mm-mm. But we're talking about, mental and emotional as well, right? So I think that's important to distinguish.
Mm-hmm. And not to encourage people to label themselves or their partners, but if there is a diagnosis, mm-hmm. Education is helpful, mm-hmm. and kind of becoming part of that discussion with your partner may be helpful. It's really important to check in and see, do you want me coming with you to appointments? Do you want me not to? and if I do, what's my role? That was something that one of our good friends pointed out to us, and she has a multitude of chronic conditions that she's dealing with. So it's really, I think, vital to have those conversations and not make assumptions about, oh, well, I'm your partner, so therefore I'm entitled to go to these appointments or, ask all the questions.
Right.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that goes back to, respecting your partner and what their needs are and wants are in those situations, and then checking in with them, like you said, to make sure that you're honoring those. Because I know sometimes it's important for the person that's challenged by the illness to be their own advocate and to be their own autonomous being and to be seen as such, as opposed to being something that others might feel, responsible for in some way.
Well, there's so many of us who have that caretaking nature that comes up around people when they're struggling, that it can overwhelm the person.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
And also there's like a little bit of, when we do for people, we take away their ability and their sovereignty. And if it's not welcome, if it's, overly much so, right?
Yeah. And then there's the balance between those two things, right? Because then you can go to the other end of the spectrum.
You do nothing for them.
Well, no. What I was going to say is you can go to the other end of the spectrum where you want your partners to do everything for you. Right.
Yeah.
And so and if that's not a question of physical incapacitation, but more a sort of, more of a victim story kind of a mentality, then I think there needs to be a balance between that, right? And we kind of talk a bit about that in the blog that you wrote about this, which was the reason that we're doing it, is because I think there is that idea of within the relationship, making sure that we're building it in such a way that there is that balance and that autonomy, and that both people are feeling safe in the space. And so maybe one partner is developing some resentment because the other partner, has been given a license to do something, but they're still not doing it. Right?
Can you give me an example of that?
I can give you 1,000.
Okay, without naming names.
Well, yeah, I don't. Yeah, I'm not. Yeah. Yeah. So let's say I'm just going to give you a generic example. I'm not going to speak specifically about my experiences because, well, no, actually, I will speak about my experience.
Sure.
So I know that there was a long time in my life where my emotional dysregulation had me convinced that I was a victim. And even though I thought that I was doing the work, and even though I thought that I was doing everything necessary, I wasn't really doing everything I could. I wasn't really doing everything I could to work through that victim story and come out the other side of it more balanced. And so when I would have partners tell me, certain things, it would land, even though they were trying to be helpful, it would land with me in such a way to where it felt like it was incredibly unhelpful. And that was less to do with them and far more to do with me and my perception of my illness, right? And so it's that victim story that we tell ourselves, right? That piece about, I just want to sit here and be taken care of all the time, or I don't want to do the work. When we're able to do the work, and that's the important piece to note here, is that there has to be the ability to do the work, right? So when we recognize that we have the ability to do it, but we're not doing it, that requires a level of honesty that can be oftentimes very uncomfortable for us. And so we don't step into that. And then what happens is that resentment ends up building up on our partner's end, because the partner's like, well, you've been cleared to do this. Why aren't you doing it?
Yeah.
What's going on here, right? And so I've experienced that many times in my life with my partners in terms of, they're questioning me and trying to find out why I'm not doing something, and I'm taking it from a place of resistance and like, well, you don't know me, and the whole victim story thing that I told myself for a very long time.
So I guess what the message is.
Yes, please, let's sum the message up from that very long explanation.
Well, it's important because I think what you're saying is you recognize in yourself that you were more comfortable with the victim story and having others tend to you than with doing some of the harder work, even while you're challenged and going through something.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Right?
That's very correct.
Yeah. And so what you're saying is, that's another extreme of the situation that could happen. And you're encouraging people to really try and be honest with themselves.
But further to that, I want to say that if you feel like you're doing enough and that's where you're at, then that's where you're at. And I think that's great. And I think that it's important to recognize and acknowledge that you are doing as much as you possibly can. This is just my personal experience and where I was at the time. And that I recognized, even in the moments, I recognized I wasn't doing as much as I could, and that I would rather be taken care of as opposed to taking care of myself. So I think that's something that's an important distinction to make is that, this is about self-recognition and understanding where you're at. And if you're really not capable of doing something, don't push yourself to do it.
Right. Yes. Right.
And don't beat yourself up for not being able to do it.
Right. And I would, so I was in a place not that long ago where I was still really struggling. And sometimes I will crash, right? So I'll have a good day and I'll have a really bad day. I find the narrative that I start telling myself, the story I start telling myself is, I am not doing enough, or I've missed 2 days of physio, so therefore that's what crashed me and that's my fault. It's the beating yourself up part. And then you can get into that negative mind spiral, right? Where you're just like, I'm not feeling well and I'm not doing enough. And therefore that makes me not feel well. And therefore I don't do enough. And therefore it just goes round and round. That's been my experience. Yeah.
Same.
So looking back on that, on my good days, give yourself that understanding and compassion and be like, yeah, that did happen. And maybe there was something that you could have done differently, but now we're moving forward from this, right? It's always a new day. Mm-hmm. Even if your condition is worsening, it's still a new day. We need to take it almost moment by moment, right?
For sure. Mm-hmm. I completely agree. Thank you for that. I wanted to ask you something.
Sure.
Something about in your blog, because I really like this piece here that you talk about when it comes to listening. And you say that don't override the expression with toxic positivity. Saying things like "you've got this" or "you'll be fine" can feel dismissive to someone who is having a hard time. Mm-hmm. Can you unpack that a bit for me? Because I often find myself wanting to be that person that's like, "Oh, come on, you got this, you can do it," right? As the motivator, right? And maybe I'm not realizing what you're saying here is that sometimes it can be dismissive to people. So I'm curious to know where that comes from for you.
Yeah. Well, so in the kind of taking it moment by moment approach that I have adopted for myself, when I'm struggling, I often still have a tendency to present well. I may be struggling with a very bad headache and dizziness and light and sound sensitivity that day, and I'll still behave relatively normally. That's me doing the work, doing what I can do, right? And so I think if I'm in that state and I say, ugh, I can't do a single thing more. These dishes will have to wait, for example. I can't stand the clanking and the clacking of them today, right? If I express, that I'm going to leave the dishes or something like that, you're not typically the kind of person that's going to come up and be like, well, why didn't you do the dishes? You're more the kind of partner that will just do the dishes. And I know that about you. So I don't even know that this really applies to our relationship, but I do know that there are people in the world that aren't you, and they might ask. They might be like, oh, I thought you were going to do the dishes today, right? And if the person who's dealing with the chronic condition says I can't, or gives an excuse like I didn't have time to present well, sometimes they will do that. Then, as a partner, the idea of encouragement or support might come across as, pushy and non-supportive and not understanding. So maybe adopting more of a curiosity, right? Can I check in with you? How are you feeling? Rather than making assumptions. That's the problem with a lot of chronic illness that is invisible, is that we just don't know. Our partner can look fairly normal and be behaving fairly normally and be struggling. And when I say partner, I mean anybody that you're in a relationship with, right? We've talked about this before in previous podcasts. Could be family members, it could be anybody. And so, I think, if I'll give you a different example, because maybe the dishes didn't work so well, but I have a dad who's in long-term care, and some days he has bad days, right? When he's got a bad day, for me to come in there and be like, come on, Dad, let's do your physio together. Let's play cards together. Let's, pass the ball around together. When he's fatigued, maybe didn't sleep well, didn't eat well, is feeling pain, discomfort that I can't see, right? And he can't communicate clearly. That kind of overriding where he's at with what I want him to do and my so-called support can really be frustrating and scary and overwhelming. And why are you asking me to do that right now when I can't even focus? So
you're saying that instead of trying to be motivational or lift somebody up in those moments, maybe just get curious and find out what's going on with them. What might be happening with them that you're not aware of or that you can't see.
Or that they don't even want you to know necessarily. That's the tricky bit, right? Is that we don't necessarily want to walk around as sorry sods all the time and have everybody feel bad for us. Right. So, we spend the 6 spoons, which is an energy kind of figure in the mental health and chronic condition community. We talk about having enough spoons for the day, right? So say one day you have 10 spoons and you spend 6 of them having a shower, eating and getting dressed, and you only have 4 spoons left, right? That's the max energy that you have for the rest of the day. Somebody watching you might be like, oh, they're having a good day. They got showered, they got dressed, they got makeup on, everything's great. And then by 2:00, you're in the chair or on the sofa and can't move, and they're like, oh, come on, you can do it. Come on, let's go for a walk. Come on, right? And that desire to encourage with all good intentions just feels like you're not really in my body. You don't know what's happening with me right now. And, I'm not able to, and I need your understanding. Right.
So in that situation, then maybe what happens is because one of the things that just came up for me is that oftentimes with chronic conditions, people could go weeks sometimes without experiencing any sort of heavy amount of symptoms, and then all of a sudden, bam, something happens that's not physical, like your partner can't see it, but you feel it, and then all of a sudden, like this happens a lot with me emotionally. Because I'll go weeks and sometimes months without a depressive episode, and then all of a sudden, out of the blue, something will just hit me, and I'll become depressed, right? And you don't see that happening, but once it does start to happen, right? And then I say to you, "Hey, look, I'm feeling this way." Okay, then back off. What do you need right now? And maybe you don't have the answer to that question. Maybe you don't know what you need right now. But what you know you don't need is somebody up in your business telling you to get up and you got this, and go run the marathon and be a fucking rock star, right? That's not what you need, because in my situation that would just make me feel worse. I'd feel like I was letting you down.
Absolutely.
Right. And so maybe that's what you're referring to here, is this idea that even though the person that's trying to do the motivation is doing it from this loving, kind, and healthy place, maybe if they're honest with themselves, there's not just that loving kindness coming out towards them, but they also in fact need to do some investigating in terms of why it's important that their partner get up and you've got this. Why is that important? What's that narrative there, right? It works both on both sides of things.
And what happens if they can't, are not able to that day? What does that mean to you?
Right. Exactly. You're getting curious about what that represents to you, and what do you see in that?
I think there's a lot of fear, right? A lot of fear around that. When you watch someone be debilitated by their condition and you feel helpless, fearful about the future, what's possible.
Yeah.
Are you okay?
I am. I'm good. I'm just crying.
I'm just crying. And
Fine.
You worry.
I do.
Yeah.
I mean, if I can speak to you and us,
Sure.
That happens a lot for me. Is that it's been a huge adjustment for me in terms of I do get scared.
Yeah.
I get scared that because you do present very well. So when you're not presenting well, I know shit's getting real. And I know that you have the needs and you have the self-care routines that you have in place and stuff. And sometimes, if I'm honest, sometimes I don't see it. Sometimes I'm so wrapped up in my own shit that I don't see what you're going through, because it's not a broken arm, or, it doesn't have a physical manifestation that I can see all the time. So sometimes I forget. Right. And then I feel like shit when I forget, because then I'm like, am I a good partner? Am I supporting you enough? Am I doing the right thing? And then I get afraid that you're not going to love me anymore because I'm a shit person at this. But then I also get there's a fear that comes up for me around losing you.
Yeah.
Not just like physically losing you, but also losing the connection and the feelings with you, because I might be too much, or because I might not be empathetic enough,
or because I might not be capable enough.
Right.
Yeah. I didn't mean to laugh at you. I was laughing at, the idea that you don't think that you'd support me. You do. You clearly do. And for me, I know that it's a struggle some days, and other days it's a bit easier, right? And when you're struggling with your own issues too, things get compounded. So I think for me, the biggest thing about this is the adjusting, right? The adjusting that has to happen.
Right.
And that comes it addresses all the elements of a relationship, from, time spent together, how much sleep is required, what the conditions of the environment need to be to make a safe space for the person. um, and planning ahead for those things. And if something goes awry and you find yourself in an environment where they're not safe or they don't feel good, being flexible enough to just say, okay, change of plans, let's move, right? Let's change this. This isn't working.
Yeah, that happened to us just the other day.
Yeah. Can you remind me? I believe you.
Yeah, we were sharing some intimate time and something came up for me.
Yeah.
And in that experience, I experienced some emotional triggers.
Right.
And we decided to stop what we were doing and allow me to process that in my way. And
have a different kind of intimacy.
And have a different kind of intimacy, yeah. And so that was a beautiful shifting of the energy and allowing of the energy, right?
And when you're the person who's struggling, there's loads of self-recrimination. So nobody.
There was, yes.
Well, nobody wants to struggle. Nobody does.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because what I think about when I hear that is that you're right. Nobody wants to struggle, but there are people out there like me who enjoy being the victim sometimes. It's part of our trauma response. It's the way we protect ourselves sometimes. So there are people out there that, and I'm sure, I mean, I'm making that assumption, to be honest. I can't imagine I'm the only person that feels that way.
I can't imagine that either.
And so I think while we say that nobody wants to struggle, I think that some people, and me included, sometimes like the idea of being taken care of. Right?
Yeah.
And I think that's important to acknowledge and to understand. And then taking that a step further when it comes to chronic illness and conditions, being honest with yourself about that. Sometimes that's what you need. Sometimes you just need to be taken the fuck care of.
Yeah.
Like, sometimes you just can't fucking do it yourself.
Yes.
And
that can be hard to admit.
My God, that's so hard. It's so hard to admit. I mean, it's been really hard for me to admit that sometimes I just can't do it. And there are certain things that I can't do that I used to be able to do that I just cannot bring myself to do anymore. And I know that that's your story as well.
Absolutely.
You used to be a teacher and you can't do that anymore. And you love teaching for 25 years.
Yeah, but now when I walk past a playground full of kids who are screaming or a gaggle of teenagers, I'm just like energetically overwhelmed immediately. I've got to get away from that.
Right. Because it's just too much input. It's too much.
Yeah.
So I think acknowledging that and understanding as part of, I mean, one of the things that you talk about here with the list on your blog is asking for help as part of, when you need it. Ask for help when you need it as part of your self-care routine. I can't do this. I need help with this. You mentioned the dishes.
On both sides, right? Like, yeah, if you're the person with the chronic condition, mention to your partner, I need help, and vice versa.
And if you're the person that's not with a chronic condition and you can't handle something, or you're in your own struggle or challenge, and you're not able to be supportive of your partner, then ask for help. Not necessarily from your partner, mind you, but maybe from somebody else.
Yeah.
Right?
Support systems are important.
Absolutely. 100% they are. And there's no, I think we live in a society where that is perceived as a weakness, where we should be able to do all things for all people all the time. And that's the expectation maybe in some way, but hopefully that's shifting and changing as we become more aware of mental health and also physical health and how it impacts the emotional and the psychological stuff that we go through. There's that word stuff again. So I think I'm getting a little lost here, because I'll be honest, that this is a far more impactful conversation than I expected it to be. It's bringing up some stuff for me.
Yeah.
And I don't want to stop talking about it.
Okay.
But I do want to make you aware of it, and I want to make our audience aware of it too. That it's bringing some stuff up for me, because I recognize that there was a time in my life where there was an enormous amount of weight on me that I didn't even realize in the moment when I was there.
Yeah.
And then as soon as that weight was lifted, I was like, oh shit, And so this is bringing back a lot of that, because I felt like in a lot of ways I was going crazy and I was doing everything wrong. And no matter what I tried or what I did or what I said, it wasn't the right thing to do. And I recognized that that was my chronic illness talking to me, right?
Mm-hmm.
This psychological, the emotional illness that I have, which is, emotional dysregulation and anxiety and depression and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is bringing up some stuff for me for sure.
Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for being willing to do this. I think,
if I'm honest, I didn't realize it was going to do this when we started. When we talked about the topic, it's like, oh yeah, cool, yeah, let's do that. Yeah. I've lived this and I've been on both sides of this. And I'm like, and as I'm sitting here talking about it, I'm like, fuck me. This is really hitting me. It's hitting me because it has impacted our relationship.
Yeah.
So much.
Yeah.
In frankly, in both comfortable and uncomfortable ways, in very life-giving and very life-protecting ways.
Mm-hmm.
There have been shifts and transitions in our relationship simply because of your chronic illness or mine,
mm-hmm.
that have taken us to new and wondrous places.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But really uncomfortably, like kicking, fighting, teeth, fuck you, get the fuck away from me levels of uncomfortable. But yet here we are.
Well, I think whenever you're dealing with something, you're adjusting all the time to what the new normal is.
Mm-hmm.
And that new normal isn't even stable.
No. It's like I said earlier, it's like you can
unpredictable.
Go months.
Yeah.
It's unpredictable. You go weeks or months and everything's great. And then all of a sudden, wham, here we go, another shift. And maybe that's sort of kind of a parable of life, really.
Yes.
When you think about it, because life is that way, right? And so one of the takeaways maybe from this might be that it's so cliched to say, but cliches are cliches for a reason, is that it's not what happens to us, but how we deal with it that really matters. And I think that's ultimately the message here from my side of things, and I'm assuming from yours as well,
mm-hmm.
is that having a chronic illness is okay. It's perfectly fine to have it. It's you're not weak. You're not less than in some way because of it.
Mm-hmm.
And this isn't what that's about. This is about how you can effectively manage it in a partnership, in a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Is that accurate?
Absolutely. I think also the idea that we have as the healthier partner, we have the extra stressors, we have surprises that come from our partner's illness that derail or change our plans, that impact our daily life with them. And that can be really challenging. You can be aware that your partner has a condition and say, yeah, that's fine, I'm cool with that, and a few years later realize that this is a much different landscape than you thought it was going to be. It's not necessarily worse, it's just different. And the idea of kind of having a willingness to explore what that is, right? Like, mm-hmm. Instead of seeing the constant kind of challenge of not knowing, adopting the approach of exploratory experimentation. What can we do? If my partner, is having trouble going outside or has mobility issues, what can I do with them that doesn't require any particular mobility from them? We can be a lot more creative once we let go of the expectations what we used to be able to do or what they used to be able to do, and are present and curious and willing, there's a lot of beautiful discovery that can happen, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't necessarily have to look like it used to look.
Mm-hmm.
You were just
Yeah.
saying in some wondrous ways we have shifted and changed, and yeah, for sure we have, and had to adjust to new normals all the time, and that has given us richness and variety that we may not have had otherwise. And everybody is on, the decline, let's be honest, right? Like when we're looking at humanity, there's no guarantee of your own health and well-being from day to day. So this is actually really important life skill, that we're talking about. The adaptability, the experimentation and exploration, the willingness, the being present, lack of expectation. All of those things really will help anybody navigate being human as we all grow older and our abilities change.
Exactly. And actually, as I look through this, as I work through this, rather, it's kind of come up to me that this is far more reaching than just people with chronic illnesses, because this happens in so many other different ways, right? And so I think the skills and stuff in the blog post that you wrote and that we're talking about today can be used in any kind of a relationship. I also think it's important to acknowledge that there are extra stressors and extra levels of responsibility that we need to take on when we are in a relationship with somebody who has a chronic illness. And I apologize if I'm not saying that the right way. I don't mean to offend anyone. For some reason, I feel like maybe I have. But the ultimate thing is that we have to acknowledge that if we're stepping into this knowingly, eyes wide open, that we're as prepared as we can be for all of the changes and all the shifts that may come up during that process.
Well, yeah, and that's one of the reasons why education is so important, right? You don't necessarily need to be as educated as your partner with the chronic illness, but some education around what does this look like? What are the things that could help? Maybe they might guide you to making better choices and planning better. I know that I kind of have the 4 pillars in the blog post. So they are: listen to your partner,
and to yourself.
and who has the chronic illness, and also listen to yourself and what you're needing. Honor those limitations, right, that they have, and make plans and celebrate the things that they can do, right?
Create safe spaces.
Yeah. And then there's the self-care piece for both people involved. As the person who is healthier, make sure that you stay healthier. do all the things that you need to do. And don't neglect your life outside the relationship, your health on multiple levels, the financial situation that you might be in, giving up time at work to be a caregiver now might not be the best choice, right? Especially if your partner is relatively independent. So it might behoove you to spend that time, working more when you can, so that you have something to fall back on the days that you can't, or when you need to bring someone in to help. And then the other 2 are relationship building and be real. So with the relationship building, it's kind of like, do the things that bring joy into your life. talk about intimacy. What does intimacy look like? Maybe have some, safe words like I'm having a green day, as opposed to a red day,
And just to be clear, ouch is not a safe word, just saying. Anyway.
Ouch is not no.
No.
So checking in with your partner and saying, okay, I want to check in with you, but I don't want to be annoying about it. So is it okay if I check in with you daily? Or how would you like me to check in with you? Right?
Right.
So it's not like, how are you? How are you? Oh.
So let me ask you.
Oh, baby, how are you?
Right? Let me ask you. Yeah. Yes. Can I ask you a question about that?
Sure. Yeah.
What if your partner doesn't know what they
doesn't
need?
know?
What if they don't know what they need?
Sure. Then that's where the experimentation comes in, right? Like, okay, let's try this. I'm going to ask you, how did you sleep? Often that has a lot to do with somebody's state of being, right? Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily oh, how are you today? But it's oh, how did you sleep? Right? Mm-hmm. It's a lot easier to answer that quickly and succinctly and without getting into a lot of, narratives about the condition. Right?
Yeah.
Also, don't always talk about it. Like, don't make it the focus of the relationship.
Right. Talk about other things. Absolutely.
Yeah. Have fun with other things. If your partner can't go to something and you do go to something, share that with them. Don't keep it from them like a dirty little secret. Oh, I went to the display that you couldn't go see. And
the caveat to that is if they're open to it.
If they're open to it, right. Yeah. And then, the be real part is like,
can I back up just for a second?
Sure.
Can we talk about the flip side of that for a second?
Yeah.
So we've got the partner who's capable, right? And goes out and does the thing. Mm-hmm. And then the other partner who's not capable of going out and doing the thing. What sorts of advice would you give to them if there's maybe some resentment or some stuff that comes up for them to where they don't want to hear about it? They don't want it shared with them. They don't. And it's not because, I'm just going to leave it there. What advice would you give them?
I would say honor that. Just say, I would like to do this thing. I know you can't go. How do you feel about that? Have that conversation. As a compassionate partner, you might want to reduce the amount of time that you spend there, or you might want to not go after all, or you might decide to go, but not to share. If your partner, says, I don't mind if you go, but I don't really want to hear about it afterwards because I'll just be envious. Right? Mm-hmm. That's fair to say.
Okay.
But if they say, go and take pictures and bring them back and show me, that would be great because I wish I could go. Mm-hmm. But I'm having a red day, So
do you think that the person with the chronic illness in that situation, what can they do to avoid resentment building up?
Well, that calls up their compassion for their partner, right? Like, I want my partner or the people that I love to have full and rich lives that probably are larger in scope than what I'm capable of. Right? So I'll never probably go camping, or I'll never be able to go bike riding again. Or I won't go to concerts ever, unless they're very low key, very low key in small spaces that are big enough that I can get out if I need to. So, there's lots of things that are kind of on my list of can'ts, but aren't on yours. Mm-hmm. Or my daughter's, like I want you guys to go and live and have beautiful experiences, even if it's not something I can experience. And when we get to that generous headspace, we show up for our partner. That's how we show up, is, supporting their continued engagement with the world, even when ours is limited. And asking questions, like maybe there are ways for, me to participate in some limited scope, right? Through a FaceTime or something.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I would say, just imagine what you want for the people that you love. Focus on that.
Mm-hmm.
Not the envy, not the, oh, I wish I could, or I can't, or the whatevers. Focus on supporting them.
Right.
In that way.
Beautiful. Thank you for that.
Well, I hope it's beautiful. I hope it helps somebody.
Yeah, right.
That's what I do. So, and the last one is be real. So be grounded in reality when you're talking about the illness, like not in a negative Nancy kind of way, like, oh yeah, no, you couldn't do that. No, that's not possible. Right? But in a, again, asking questions, exploratory kind of way, but not pushing too far beyond limitations.
Respecting when people say no, they can't do it.
Respecting when they don't want to try it, even.
Yep.
Because that can be kind of a slap in the face. Like, I've come up with this great idea and we could do this, and the other thing, and it'll be a safe space for you because of these reasons. And can we do it? And they're like, no. What do you do with that? Well,
yeah, that's challenging.
Be real. Like they're having a day, or they're having a time right now, seeing the possibility of that, even wanting the possibility of that.
Right.
So yeah.
I just want to interject here really quick and say, don't take that personally.
Yeah. Don't take it personally. No.
And trust me, it's hard because I've been there many times, but don't take it personally. It's not about you. It's about them. And in fact, I might invite you to thank them.
Yes.
I might invite you to thank them because they are looking after somebody that you love and that you care about.
Yes, they're advocating for themselves.
Right. A very small example of that is I have a chronic pain in my left foot that doesn't allow me to run very far. And when I walk for long distances, it can flare up and be really painful. And so I tend to slow down. And so oftentimes when I'm with people that don't know that, I'll ask, hey, can we slow down a little bit? They'll say, oh, sorry. And so if they're open to it, instead of them saying sorry, I offer, instead of saying sorry, why not just say thank you? Thank you for letting me know what your limitations are. Thank you for advocating for what you need in the moment. Right. The same thing with my ear. I'm deaf in one ear. And so I oftentimes will ask people or I can't be in loud spaces and have long conversations. I have to be on a certain side of somebody. And again, that certain side of somebody thing is like, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. Well, it's not up to you to remember. it's my condition. So if I'm going to switch sides, then just say, oh, thank you, I appreciate that, because now I know that what I'm saying means something to you.
Right.
And I want to be able to hear it.
That's a great way to look at it.
Right. And so understanding it's not always easy to do that in the moment. I get it. But that part is being real to me. That's being grounded. That's taking a look at it outside of yourself. So when you come up with, like the other day, I came up with this wonderful idea for our date day, and I wasn't sure if it was going to land very well or not. I wasn't sure if you were going to be up to it. I wasn't sure about a lot of things. And I didn't tell you what it was. And so the whole time I'm like, is this going to be stupid? Is she going to be fucking miserable and disappointed, et cetera, et cetera? It turns out it was a wonderful day. We really enjoyed each other's company, and it was a great thing to do.
Yeah.
But I was prepared for it not to land as well as it did. And the reason for that is because we've been in those situations before where it's like, okay, I can't do this anymore. We got to go home.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And so I don't take those things personally anymore. There was probably a time where I did, but I don't anymore, because I recognize that has nothing to do with me and everything to do with you. And I don't want you pushing through when you're unable to push through, making yourself feel worse on the back end of things simply because it's something that might be important to me.
Mm-hmm.
I would rather you say, you know what, I can't do this anymore, and me say, you know what, thank you. I appreciate you for letting me know that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it does something else when you thank me, and you do sometimes, it does something else for me because I have guilt around those advocacy moments where I'm like, I'm feeling overwhelmed. I can't. Right? It's a hard reality check for me too in that moment, and sometimes can feel a bit embarrassing, a bit shameful. And for you to turn around and say, thank you for taking care of someone I love, makes me go, oh yeah, I did that. Good for me. Instead of oh, that's so awful that I had to do that. And I feel like such a schmuck and I've wrecked everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
It changes, that response from you changes how I feel about my asking for us to stop. So that's very helpful. I love it.
Good.
The other thing about being real is the idea of like, you're still in a relationship, you're still, going to have things to bicker about and argue about, checking in and making sure that where your partner's head's at is really useful for any relationship anytime, but especially when you're dealing with chronic conditions. If you know that you want to talk about something that could be a bit difficult or challenging, right? And so choosing some timing is important, but that doesn't mean stop having those conversations. It doesn't mean stop, being authentic.
Right.
It just means being mindful.
Right.
Right.
Right. Yeah, you mentioned argue like a normal person, like a normal human, right? And I like that. And that doesn't mean that, when we say argue, it doesn't mean yelling and shouting and all of that stuff, but have your disagreements like a normal person, because they're going to happen. You're in a relationship, you're different people, you're going to disagree.
Yeah.
Right. And if you're constantly in agreement with the person simply because you don't want to rock the boat, or you're walking on eggshells, or, whatever analogy you want to use here, if that's the case, then get curious about why that is. What are you trying to protect? Are you trying to protect yourself, or are you trying to protect them? And
what kind of authentic intimacy are you actually achieving?
Mm-hmm.
Do they even really know you if all you are doing is saying yes to them and placating? Yeah. Right? Acquiescing all the time, just because you don't want to make them feel worse.
Right. And we circle back to things like self-care and relationship building. Those are the moments where intimacy arrives. And intimacy isn't always sex. Mm-mm. Intimacy isn't always cuddling or snuggling. Intimacy sometimes is really difficult, uncomfortable disagreements.
Yeah.
That can be a very intimate experience. And if you're not stepping into that because you're afraid that the person that you're with is going to be upset by it and compounded by their chronic illness, then I think you're doing them a disservice in a lot of ways. Right? But like you said, pick your time, know your audience, know your environment, and make sure that you're checking in with them because, hey, I want to have a difficult conversation with you, but I want to make sure that you're capable of having that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Like for me, I can't, after about 3:00 in the afternoon, definitely by 4 most days, I start to kind of go offline,
Yeah.
I'm just kind of like, oh dear. The fatigue starts to hit me.
Leanne is shutting down. Leanne is shutting down. I repeat, please make all pillows and bedding available immediately.
Right?
Yeah.
So if you know that you want to talk to me about something serious,
get it in before 3.
No. No. Early in the morning or after the nap has happened. Like, at the most refreshed point of the day, right?
Right.
It's, it's just like with anybody who, that might get hangry This is not the time. Not
Yeah.
the time. If they haven't had lunch yet,
Speaking of which, no.
don't bring up the stuff.
And I think
Yeah.
I think there's something else too. I think the other thing that we're talking about here on the Be Real pillar is humor.
Yes.
Be funny. Don't
Yes.
forget about humor. Laugh at yourself sometimes.
Well, and the joke that you just did about Leanne is shutting down.
Right.
Make all pillows and bedding available immediately. I love that. That's so funny
Yeah.
because it really is like, I just need to, can I, there's
Can I just
got to be a
use that
bed
head?
here somewhere.
Just a pillow.
You know?
I'll just use my hand right now. It's okay. You know,
Yeah.
and there's some truth to that, right? And so I think finding the humor in it,
It's
it makes it
fantastic.
real. It humanizes it. It normalizes it.
And it doesn't make the conditions so dire or
Right?
so awful.
I can't
Like
tell
a
you how many
problem.
I can't tell you how many times I've met people with disabilities who have thanked me because I don't treat them like a person with a disability.
Right.
You know, I mean, I have been known to want to play catch with people in wheelchairs.
Right. Well, you did that with Dad.
Yeah,
You
I
told
wasn't
him to
gonna
go
mention-
long, and he had
I
a
was-
good long laugh about that.
Right? I'm like, go long, Mel, go long, right? And he's not the first person I've done that with, but I don't know if you can't laugh at, you know, right? Like, but I also don't want, you got to know your audience too, right? Like if the
Yeah.
person's not open to that, then you have to know that. And sometimes you do it and it doesn't land very well at all. And
So
have
then
to
you
be
own it.
open
You
to
own
that.
it, right? Like, oh,
Right.
sorry.
Yeah. Oh shit.
Yeah.
Sorry. I was trying to be funny and, you know, I totally apologize. And I can see
Yeah.
how that was offensive and it probably will never happen again.
Yeah. Exactly.
You know, and even in that moment when you do that, sometimes what happens, and this has actually happened to me before now that I think about it, when you make that joke or try to bring some humor into it and it doesn't land very well the first time, and then they say to you, you know, that I'm not feeling that, you know, and then you get to know that person, and over time you start to make those same jokes again. So maybe it didn't land that well because they didn't know you and they didn't know what your intentions were.
Right. They didn't
And so
trust the intent.
They didn't trust the intent, right? And so maybe over time they learn to trust you and they learn to know that you are trying to normalize their condition as much as you possibly can and show them acceptance and love because of that's one of the ways that you do it is through that humor piece, right?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, just know your audience and be aware of who you're talking to and stuff. And if it goes sideways, then own it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So I think we've covered pretty much a fair bit of what's in the blog. I will put the link to the blog in our information of the podcast. So if you'd like to have a look at it, it's a little bit, well, it's significantly more detailed. But, you know, those 4 pillars, listen, self-care, relationship building, and be real, I think are the ones that stood out for me. And some of the people that I know that are living with chronic conditions as well. So I hope it's helpful.
I do want to mention one more thing though.
Yeah.
I think this is important given that we're talking about relationships specifically. Date your partner.
Oh yeah.
You mentioned this is the last point here, and I just really want to bring some attention to this and focus on this for a minute. Go on a date with your partner. And you mentioned things like if you know, even if it's just a picnic on the bed, you know, or watching a movie, right? It doesn't matter, but date your partner. That's really, really important. And I'm not really quite sure why that landed with me so the way it did, but it had a big impact on me. And I think that's something that's really important in the process of being real as well as relationship building. I think it falls under both of those is you know, date them, but also respect their boundaries and respect their needs. And if it becomes too much, then back off. If it becomes something that they're no longer capable of doing in the moment, then shift and transition and create that safe space for them to be able to shift into something else. Maybe it's laying down for a while, or maybe it's just stopping the activity altogether, right? So yeah, but date your partner, get intimate, be real. If you're romantic, continue to be a romantic.
Right.
Continue to bring them flowers, continue to write them poems, continue to do all of the things that you've been doing. if this is a new thing. If it's not a new thing and you've been that way all along with your partner, and you've dealt with a chronic condition since you've met, it's probably, it's just as important as it would be in any relationship to continue to date and not treat them differently in some way.
Well, and it's interesting too, because I just want to pop this in here, and maybe this is another podcast entirely, but with COVID,
this happens a lot.
With COVID, a lot of people have had to adjust how they find those, special private moments of dating when they're in lockdown, when they are uncomfortable going to restaurants, all those things. Those are also, situations where people have become really creative. So let's apply that same kind of creativity to the people in our lives with chronic conditions.
Something just hit me. In a lot of ways, we as a society have been dealing with a chronic condition for the past year and a half.
Wow.
Right?
Yes.
Right? Because this isn't going away anytime soon. And while we're not dealing with it necessarily directly with just one partner, we're dealing with it with a society. And so you're right, we've had to shift. We've had to change the way that we interact and the way that we connect. Right? So the lesson maybe here is that shifting and that transitioning into different spaces when it's necessary, right? And finding more flexibility in the moment.
Right. And deferring to the comfort level of the person who is experiencing the most limitations or has the most needs that are requiring addressing, right?
Right?
So if I'm, for example, comfortable being unmasked and in a restaurant, but I'm going out with somebody who is not, right? I adjust to defer to their needs because I want to spend time with them.
Right.
So we go find a patio maybe, or we go to a park instead.
Right.
I've never been to so many parks as I have in the last 2 years. It's like, I
think we got all the parks in Calgary down, that's for sure.
But, yeah, that's a really good observation, honey. Thank you. We have, as a society, been dealing with a chronic condition and continue to. So it's all applicable. And in many ways, I feel like some of these points, if we applied them to every relationship, would be just as useful.
For sure.
Right? So I think we should wrap it up.
Let's wrap it up.
All right.
And remember,
keep it kind
and choose love.
We'd love to hear your comments, questions, or topic suggestions. And remember to subscribe.
And you're invited to join our Facebook group, Empowered Now Relationship Support and Advice for All.
You can reach out to us on our websites at gregmillion.com
and leannemillion.com,
or follow us on Instagram at gregmillion.lifecoach
and at Leanne Million. All right. Who did the intro last time? I don't remember.
I don't remember. Doesn't matter.
My chair is stuck on this.
What are you
mat.
doing? Yeah, you need a minute, or
I'm fine. I can do it myself. Fuck. It's hard, man.
It looked like you were doing something else there for a second.
We have this mat so I can roll my chair, except I can't roll my chair because the mat is too thin for my weight.
Well, it's too thin for my weight too. So
yeah. So okay. It's fucking summer and I'm freezing. Okay, ready?
Yeah.
In 3, 2, 1. Hi, and welcome to episode 16.
Wait.
What is fucking happening?
I just belched.
Okay, ready? Do you have your
So
gas under control, dear?
I would feel so bad if that was like the best intro ever and it was like a little blurb.
Right.